The transit station on Prime was the kind of place where nobody looked at anybody else. Thousands of beings from dozens of worlds passed through every day, and they all had somewhere to be. The air smelled of fuel and fried food, and the sweat of species Danny Cole could not even name. He sat on a metal bench with his bag between his feet and watched the crowd flow past like a river that never stopped. Danny was 26 years old and he hauled cargo for a living. His ship was small and old and held together with patches and prayers. He flew between human colonies on the outer edges of settled space, carrying whatever needed carrying. It was not glamorous work. It barely paid enough to keep fuel in his tanks and food in his belly. But it was honest and it was his, and that was enough. His transport was delayed by 3 hours. Some problem with the docking clamps, they said. Danny had heard that excuse before. He settled in to wait because there was nothing else to do. He had brought his lunch in a brown paper bag because he could not afford the prices at the station vendors. A ham and cheese sandwich, an apple, and a bottle of water, simple food for a simple man. The crowd kept moving. Danny watched them without really seeing them. A group of tall blue beings in flowing robes. A cluster of small furry creatures chattering in high-pitched voices. A family of something that looked like walking rocks, their children tumbling around their feet. The galaxy was full of strange and wonderful things, and most of them ignored Danny completely. Then he noticed the old woman. She sat alone on a bench across the walkway. She was alien clearly, with green skin that sagged with age and large eyes that had gone cloudy. Her clothes were worn and patched in several places. She had no bags, no belongings, nothing but herself. She sat very still and watched the food vendors with an expression Danny recognized. It was hunger, not the mild hunger of someone who had skipped breakfast, the deep hunger of someone who had not eaten in a long time. Danny watched her for a while. Other travelers walked past without looking. Some of them made gestures that Danny assumed were rude, though he did not know the customs well enough to be sure. One group actively changed direction to avoid walking near her. She did not react to any of it. She just sat there, quiet and alone. A station security officer approached her. Danny tensed, expecting trouble. But the old woman reached into her worn coat and produced some kind of documentation. The officer looked at it and something strange happened. His whole body language changed. He backed away with what looked like fear on his face. He almost bowed before hurrying off. Danny did not understand what had just happened, but he kept watching. The old woman returned to her stillness. She watched the food vendors again. A young alien child dropped a piece of fruit near her bench, and she looked at it for a long moment before looking away. She did not take it. She had too much pride for that, Danny realized. She would not beg and she would not steal, even though she was clearly suffering. Danny looked down at his brown paper bag. His stomach growled. He had been looking forward to this sandwich all morning. It was nothing special, just bread and meat and cheese, but it was his and he was hungry too. He looked at the old woman again. Something his mother had told him a long time ago came back to him. She had said that you could tell everything about a person by how they treated someone who could do nothing for them. Danny's mother had been a good woman. She had died 3 years ago, but her words stayed with him. Danny picked up his bag and walked across the walkway. The old woman watched him approach with those cloudy eyes. Up close, she looked even older than he had thought. Ancient, really. There were lines on her face that seemed to tell stories of centuries. He sat down next to her without asking permission. She did not move away. Danny opened his bag and took out the sandwich. It was wrapped in simple paper. He unwrapped it carefully and tore it in half. He held out one half to the old woman. She looked at the sandwich, then she looked at him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then the old woman reached out with trembling hands and took the offered food. Her fingers were thin and delicate, with an extra joint that human fingers did not have. She ate slowly. She savored each bite as if it were the finest meal she had ever tasted. Danny ate his half too, and they sat together in silence while the crowd flowed past. When she finished, she turned to him. Her voice was soft and accented, but she spoke Galactic Common well enough. She said her name was Grandmother. She asked his name and where he came from. Danny told her. He said he was Danny Cole from Earth, just a cargo hauler waiting for his transport. Nothing special about him at all. Grandmother smiled at that. It was a small smile, tired but genuine. She said that he was wrong about that. She said that special was not about what someone did for a living. It was about what someone did when nobody was watching. They talked for a while. Danny shared his apple too, cutting it with his pocket knife and giving her the larger portion. They talked about small things, the weather on Prime, the delays in the transit system, the strange foods sold by the vendors. Simple conversation between two strangers who had decided, for a brief moment, not to be strangers. Danny's transport was finally called. He gathered his bag and stood up. He told grandmother that it was nice meeting her. He hoped she would be all right. She reached out and took his hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. She pressed something small and cold into his palm. She told him that kindness given freely was the rarest currency in the galaxy. She said she would not forget his face. Danny looked down at his palm. It was a small metal token, circular and heavy, with strange symbols carved into its surface. They seemed to glow faintly in the station lights. He looked up to thank her, to ask what it meant. But the bench was empty. Grandmother was gone. Danny looked around, scanning the crowd, but there was no sign of her anywhere. She had vanished as if she had never been there at all. Danny stood there for a long moment, holding the strange token. Then his transport was called again, and he had to go. He slipped the token into his pocket. It felt warm against his leg. He did not know what it was or what it meant, but something told him that his life had just changed. He did not know how or why. He just knew. Danny Cole walked to his transport, a simple cargo hauler heading back to his simple life. Behind him, the transit station continued its endless rush. Nobody noticed that an old woman had been there. Nobody noticed that she was gone. Nobody except Danny. 3 months had passed since Danny Cole shared his sandwich with an old woman on Prime. He had gone back to his regular life, hauling cargo between human colonies in his little ship, the Penny Luck. The token from grandmother hung on a cord around his neck. He wore it always, though he did not know why. It felt right to keep it close. He was making a routine run between 2 small colonies when everything changed. The Penny Luck was a slow ship. It could not outrun anything larger than a personal shuttle. So when the massive warship dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly in front of him, Danny knew he had no chance of escape. He did not even try. The warship was enormous. It was black and silver and shaped like a blade, and it was at least 100 times larger than his little cargo vessel. Danny had never seen anything like it, but he recognized the symbols on its hull. Everyone in the galaxy knew those symbols. Hegemony. Danny's blood went cold. They were one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the known galaxy. They had been building empires when humans were still learning to make fire. They had conquered dozens of worlds and absorbed countless species into their domain. They were known for their cold efficiency and their complete lack of interest in younger races like humanity. Humans had no formal relations with them. Most who encountered them simply disappeared. A voice came through his communication system. It was calm and commanding. It told him to power down his engines and prepare to be brought aboard. Danny did as he was told. He did not see any other option. A beam of light enveloped the Penny Luck and pulled it into the belly of the great warship. Danny sat in his pilot's seat and tried to control his breathing. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. They took him from his ship and escorted him through corridors of polished metal. The soldiers were tall and slender with the same green skin as grandmother. Their faces showed no emotion at all. They did not speak to him. They did not answer his questions. They simply walked and he walked with them. Danny expected to be taken to a cell. He expected interrogation, imprisonment, maybe worse. Instead, they brought him to a great hall with high ceilings and walls covered in strange artwork. A long table stood at the center, and behind it sat 5 in elaborate robes. They watched him with those large, unblinking eyes. One of them spoke. The voice was deep and formal. They asked if he was Danny Cole of Earth. He said that he was. They asked if he carried a token given to him on Prime. Danny hesitated, then reached inside his shirt and pulled out the metal disc on its cord. The reaction was immediate. All 5 of the robes stood up. They looked at each other with expressions that Danny could not read. One of them stepped forward and asked to see the token more closely. Danny took it off and handed it over. He examined it for a long moment. Then he spoke in a voice that sounded almost reverent. He said that this was a first kindness token. He said it had not been given to an outsider in over 4,000 years. He said it could only be bestowed by one person in the entire hegemony. The Matriarch Supreme. Danny did not understand. He said so. He said that he had received the token from an old woman who called herself grandmother. She had been sitting alone in a transit station. She had been hungry and worn and ignored by everyone around her. The five looked at each other again. One of them made a sound that might have been a laugh, though Danny could not be sure. They explained. They told him that grandmother was Ara, the ancient matriarch who had led the hegemony for 600 years. She was the most powerful being in their civilization. Her word was law across 1,000 worlds. And once every generation, she traveled alone and in disguise through the galaxy. Danny listened in growing disbelief as they described the matriarch's practice. She would appear as a helpless old woman in random places across the stars. She would wait and watch. She would observe how other species treated those they perceived as weak and worthless. It was how she judged their character. It was how she decided which civilizations deserved respect and which deserved contempt. Most beings ignored her. Many treated her with disgust. Some tried to rob her or hurt her. In 6 centuries, only 3 individuals had ever offered her genuine kindness without expecting anything in return. Danny was the third. He stood there in the Great Hall, surrounded by the leaders of an ancient empire, and tried to understand what this meant. He was just a cargo hauler. He had given half a sandwich to a hungry stranger. That was all. But apparently, that was everything. The lead returned the token to Danny with both hands, as if it were precious beyond measure. He told Danny that the matriarch had summoned him. She wished to speak with the human who had shared his meal with her when she had nothing to offer in return. Danny put the token back around his neck. His hands were shaking. He asked when this meeting would happen. They said that it would happen now. They would take him to the throne world of the hegemony. They would take him to the ancient seat of power that had stood for millions of years. They would take him to meet the most powerful being in the galaxy. Danny Cole, cargo hauler from Earth, followed the out of the Great Hall. His little ship, the Penny Luck, was being brought along too. The massive warship turned toward the heart of space and began to move. Danny had no idea what was waiting for him, but he knew that his life would never be the same again. A simple act of kindness had opened a door that he never knew existed. Now he had to walk through it and see what lay on the other side. He touched the token through his shirt and thought of grandmother. He thought of her tired eyes and her trembling hands and her small, genuine smile. He hoped he had made her proud. The throne world of the hegemony was called, and it was older than Danny could comprehend. The structures that covered its surface had been built before humans existed, before Earth had life at all. The planet was a living museum of millions of years of civilization, and Danny felt very small as his escort ship descended through its atmosphere. They had given him fine quarters on the warship during the journey. They had given him new clothes, good food, and anything else he asked for. Everyone treated him with respect and deference, but nobody would tell him what the matriarch wanted from him. Nobody would explain what was going to happen. Danny spent the journey feeling confused and out of place. He was a cargo hauler who lived on instant noodles and recycled water. Now he was being treated like royalty by one of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. It did not make sense to him. The ship landed at a palace that seemed to be carved from a single piece of dark stone. It rose into the purple sky like a mountain, and its windows glowed with soft golden light. Danny was escorted through halls that were decorated with art and artifacts from countless worlds. He saw statues of beings he did not recognize. He saw weapons and tools and machines whose purpose he could not guess. They had been collecting the treasures of the galaxy for longer than humanity had existed. Finally, they brought him to a great chamber at the heart of the palace. The room was circular and vast, with a domed ceiling that seemed to show the actual stars outside. At the far end sat a throne made of the same dark stone as the palace itself, and on that throne sat a figure Danny recognized. Grandmother. But she was different now. She wore robes of deep blue that seemed to shimmer with their own light. Her green skin was still aged and lined, but there was strength in her posture that had not been visible before. A crown of silver metal rested on her head. She looked like what she was, the ruler of an empire that spanned 1,000 worlds. But her eyes were the same, those cloudy, ancient eyes that had looked at Danny with such surprise when he offered her his sandwich, those eyes that had shown genuine gratitude for a simple act of kindness. The guard stopped at the entrance to the chamber. Danny had to walk the rest of the way alone. His footsteps echoed on the stone floor. The distance felt like miles. He stopped at the base of the throne and did not know what to do. He had no idea how to address a matriarch. He had no training in diplomacy or protocol. He was just Danny Cole, and he felt completely lost. Ara smiled at him. It was the same small, tired smile she had given him on that bench in the transit station. She told him to come closer. She told him not to be afraid. Danny climbed the steps to the throne. Up close, he could see how old she truly was. 6 centuries of life had left their mark on her body, but her mind was clearly still sharp. Her eyes missed nothing. She asked if he remembered her. He said that he did. He said he had thought about her often since that day. She told him to sit. There was a cushion beside the throne, and Danny lowered himself onto it. It felt strange to sit beside such a powerful being, but she seemed to want him close. She began to explain. She told him about her tests. She told him how she had walked among hundreds of species over the centuries, disguised as someone weak and helpless. She had seen the worst that the galaxy had to offer. She had been ignored, insulted, robbed, and left to suffer by beings who saw no value in helping someone who could not help them back. In 600 years, only 3 individuals had passed her test. Danny was the third. She asked him about humanity. What were they like? What did they value? What made them different from all the other young species trying to find their place in the galaxy? Danny did not know how to answer at first. He was not a philosopher or a scholar. He did not have grand theories about human nature. He was just a man who hauled cargo and tried to get by. But she waited patiently, and eventually he found the words. He told her that humans were messy and complicated. He said that some humans were cruel and selfish and cared only about themselves, but many others tried to be good. They tried to help each other even when it was hard. They formed communities and families and friendships because they knew that life was easier when you did not face it alone. He told her what his mother had taught him. He said that you could tell everything about a person by how they treated someone who could do nothing for them. The matriarch nodded slowly. She said this was wisdom. She said this was what she had been searching for. She told Danny that they had been watching humanity for some time. Humans were young and chaotic and sometimes made terrible mistakes. But they had potential. They had something that many older species had lost, the capacity for genuine compassion without calculation. She told him that she wanted to open formal relations with humanity. She wanted the hegemony to recognize Earth and its colonies as worthy partners, and she wanted Danny to be the bridge between their peoples. Danny protested immediately. He said he was nobody. He was a cargo hauler with a small ship and no education in politics or diplomacy. He did not know how to represent his entire species. He was not qualified for something so important. The matriarch listened to his objections without interrupting. When he finished, she reached out and took his hand. Her grip was warm and gentle. She told him that qualification was not the same as worthiness. Qualifications could be taught. Worthiness had to be proven, and he had proven his worthiness on a bench in a transit station when he shared his lunch with a hungry stranger. She asked him if he would accept. Danny looked into her ancient eyes. He thought about his small ship and his simple life. He thought about all the things he did not know and all the ways he might fail. But he also thought about his mother. He thought about what she would say if she could see him now. He took a deep breath and said yes. The matriarch smiled. She squeezed his hand and told him that he had made her very happy. She told him that this was the beginning of something important. Danny Cole, cargo hauler from Earth, sat beside the throne of the most powerful being in the galaxy and wondered what he had gotten himself into. But somewhere deep inside, he felt that this was right. This was what he was meant to do. His mother would have been proud. 1 year had passed since Danny Cole accepted the matriarch's offer, and the galaxy had noticed. The news spread quickly through human space and beyond. The hegemony, one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in existence, had opened formal relations with humanity. Trade agreements were signed. Treaties were negotiated. Doors that had been closed for centuries suddenly swung open. And at the center of it all was Danny, a cargo hauler who still insisted he was just a regular person. He had become something strange and unexpected. He was not a diplomat in any official sense. He had no title, no staff, no formal authority. But he had the token of the matriarch supreme around his neck, and that meant more than any title could. Danny traveled between worlds as a kind of living symbol. He met with leaders and officials and ordinary people from dozens of species. He told his story whenever anyone asked, though he never made himself sound heroic. He just told the truth. He had seen someone who was hungry, and he had shared what he had. The simplicity of it seemed to confuse some beings. They expected schemes and strategies and hidden motives. They could not believe that something so important had come from something so small. But Danny kept telling the truth, and slowly people began to believe him. Humanity's status in the galaxy changed in ways that diplomats had tried and failed to achieve for decades. The endorsement carried weight that human politicians could never have earned on their own. Other species began to look at humans differently. They were no longer just a young and chaotic race from an unremarkable planet. They were the people who had earned the respect of the ancient matriarch. It was not easy. Danny often felt overwhelmed and out of his depth. He made mistakes. He said the wrong things sometimes. He forgot names and customs and protocols. But the matriarch had been right about one thing. His ordinariness was actually his greatest strength. He was not polished or political. He did not play games or hide behind careful words. He was genuine, and in a galaxy full of calculation and deception, that mattered. Not everyone was happy about humanity's rise. The collective had been rivals of for thousands of years. They were a powerful civilization in their own right, and they saw the growing partnership between humans and as a threat to their influence. They began spreading stories about Danny. They said he was a fraud. They said he had somehow tricked or manipulated the matriarch. They said humans were scheming and dangerous and not to be trusted. Danny tried to ignore the rumors, but they grew louder over time. The confrontation came at a major diplomatic gathering on a neutral world called Tessera. Representatives from dozens of civilizations had come together to discuss trade and treaties and the future of the galaxy. Danny was there as an observer, standing quietly at the back of the great assembly hall. A representative stood to speak. He was tall and covered in iridescent scales, and his voice carried through the hall like thunder. He accused humanity of manipulation and deceit. He said that no species had ever earned favor so quickly without some hidden agenda. He demanded to know what Danny had really done to earn the matriarch's token. He demanded the truth. The hall fell silent. Everyone turned to look at Danny. He felt the weight of countless eyes upon him. Danny walked forward. His legs felt weak and his heart was pounding, but he walked anyway. He stood in the center of the hall and looked up at the representative. He did not know how to give a great speech. He did not have clever arguments or powerful rhetoric, so he just told the truth the same way he always had. He said that he had been waiting for a transport in a transit station. He said he had seen an old woman sitting alone, hungry and ignored by everyone around her. He said he had given her half his sandwich because it seemed like the right thing to do. That was all. There was no scheme, no plan, no hidden agenda. He had just seen someone who needed help and tried to help. They made a sound of contempt. He said that this was too simple to be believed. He said that no one did anything without expecting something in return. A new voice spoke then. It was old and quiet, but it silenced everything else in the hall. Matriarch Ara rose from her seat. She was dressed in simple robes today, not the elaborate garments of her court. She looked like what she had been on that bench, a tired old woman with cloudy eyes. She walked to the center of the hall and stood beside Danny. She told the assembly what she had experienced. She described her travels among the stars, disguised as someone weak and worthless. She described the beings who had looked away from her suffering, the ones who had insulted her, the ones who had tried to rob her. She described centuries of disappointment, centuries of learning that most civilizations cared nothing for those who could not benefit them. Then she described the day she met Danny Cole. She described how he had sat down beside her without asking permission, how he had torn his simple sandwich in half and offered it to her without hesitation, how he had shared his apple too, giving her the larger portion, how he had talked to her like she was a person, not a burden. She asked the assembly a simple question. What did it say about a species that their instinct, when seeing suffering, was to help? The representative tried to respond, but the matriarch was not finished. She said that she had lived for 600 years. She had seen empires rise and fall. She had watched civilizations destroy themselves through greed and cruelty and indifference. And in all that time, she had found only 3 beings who showed kindness without calculation. Danny Cole was one of them. She turned to thee and asked what he had ever done when he saw someone suffering. She asked what his people had done. She waited for an answer. They had none. He stood in silence, his scales changing color with what might have been embarrassment. The matriarch nodded slowly. She said that the answer to her question was also an answer to his accusation. She took Danny's hand and led him back to their seats. The assembly hall remained quiet for a long moment. Then slowly, the conversation resumed, but something had changed. The accusations against humanity faded. The doubts and suspicions lost their power. Danny sat in his seat and realized that something larger than himself had been set in motion. He was just one man who had shared his lunch with a stranger, but that small act had changed everything. He wondered what would come next. 5 years had passed since Danny Cole shared his sandwich with an old woman on Prime. 5 years since his life changed in ways he never could have imagined. Danny stood in a small cemetery on Earth, looking at a simple headstone. His mother's name was carved into the stone, along with the years of her birth and death. Flowers grew around the grave, planted by someone who still cared for this quiet place. He had not been home in a long time. His work had taken him to distant stars and alien worlds, and Earth had started to feel like a memory. But today he needed to be here. Today he needed to talk to his mother. He knelt beside the grave and began to speak. He told her everything that had happened. He told her about grandmother and the token and the throne world of the. He told her about the diplomatic gatherings and the speeches and the countless beings who had heard his story. He told her about the good days and the hard days and all the moments when he felt completely lost. And he told her that it was all because of what she had taught him. That simple lesson about kindness that she had shared when he was just a boy. That wisdom about how you could tell everything about a person by how they treated someone who could do nothing for them. He wished she could see what had grown from those words. Humanity had flourished in the 5 years since the partnership began, not as subjects or servants, but as respected allies. Human colonies had expanded into new regions of space. Human culture and ideas had spread to worlds that had never heard of Earth before. Humans walked freely on planets where they once would have been ignored or rejected. And something else had happened too, something that made Danny prouder than anything else. A movement had started, inspired by his story. People called themselves the Sandwich Bearers, which made Danny both embarrassed and pleased whenever he heard it. They were volunteers from human worlds who traveled to struggling communities across the galaxy. They brought food and supplies and help to beings who needed it, asking for nothing in return. The idea had spread beyond humans too. Other species had started similar programs. The concept was simple: find those who are suffering and help them without expectation. It was not a new idea, really. Kindness had always existed, but now it had a name and a story and a symbol, and that made it grow. Danny finished speaking to his mother's grave. He placed a small flower on the headstone and stood up slowly. His knees ached more than they used to. He was in his 30s now, and the years of travel had worn on him. A message came through his communication device. It was from the hegemony, requesting his presence at. The matriarch had summoned him one final time. Danny left Earth the next day and made the long journey to the throne world. He had made this trip many times before, but something felt different now. There was a weight in the message that he could not quite explain. When he arrived at the palace, the guards led him straight to the matriarch's private chambers. Not the great throne room where she held court, but a smaller space filled with personal belongings and memories. Ara sat in a simple chair by a window that looked out over the ancient city below. She looked older than Danny had ever seen her. 6 centuries of life were finally catching up with her body. Her hands trembled constantly now, and her cloudy eyes had grown cloudier still. She smiled when she saw him. She told him to sit beside her. Danny sat, and for a while they simply looked out the window together. The city stretched to the horizon, millions of years of history laid out like a map. The matriarch spoke slowly. She told Danny that she was tired. She had ruled for 600 years, longer than any matriarch before her. She had seen wonders and horrors and everything in between, and now her time was ending. Danny felt a sudden grief in his chest. He had known this day would come, but knowing did not make it easier. She told him that she had one final gift to give before she passed her authority to her successors. She had decided to grant humanity a permanent seat on the High Council. It was a position of honor and influence that had never been given to a species so young. Danny started to protest. He said that humanity had not earned such an honor. They were still young and foolish and made so many mistakes. The matriarch took his hand. Her grip was weak now, nothing like the strength she had shown when she pressed the token into his palm all those years ago. She told him that worthiness was not about being perfect. It was about trying to be good even when it was hard. It was about seeing suffering and choosing to help instead of looking away. Humanity had proven this. He had proven this. She told him that in her final years, a human with nothing to offer had given her hope. He had reminded her that kindness still existed in the galaxy. He had shown her that the universe was not as cold and empty as she had sometimes feared. She thanked him for the sandwich. Danny could not speak. His eyes were wet and his throat was tight. He held her hand and said nothing because there was nothing that needed to be said. They sat together by the window until the light began to fade. 3 months later, Matriarch Ara passed away peacefully in her sleep. The galaxy mourned. Her successors took her place, and the hegemony continued as it had for millions of years. And humanity took its seat on the High Council, as she had wished. Danny did not attend the ceremonies. He had been offered positions of authority and wealth, but he had declined them all. He was not meant for palaces and politics. He was meant for something simpler. He went back to his old ship, the Penny Luck. It had been repaired and upgraded many times over the years, but it was still his. He loaded up cargo and set a course for the outer colonies. Along the way, he stopped at a transit station. It was a busy place, full of beings rushing to get where they were going. Danny sat on a bench and opened his lunch bag, a simple ham and cheese sandwich, an apple, and a bottle of water. He noticed a young alien sitting alone nearby. The creature was small and covered in soft brown fur, and it was clearly lost. It watched the food vendors with hungry eyes, but it did not approach them. Other travelers walked past without looking. Danny tore his sandwich in half. He walked over and sat down beside the young alien. He held out the food without saying anything. The creature looked at the sandwich, then looked at him. Confusion gave way to hesitation, and hesitation gave way to acceptance. Small hands reached out and took the offered food. Danny smiled. He told the young one that someone had done this for him once. It had changed everything. They sat together on that bench, two beings from different worlds sharing a simple meal. The galaxy was vast and often cruel, but kindness, offered freely, could echo across the stars. It could change the fate of worlds. It could start with a sandwich.